Hi everyone, I'm Justina from theasianparent.com, and tonight we'll be talking about early learning for kids with the Glenn Doman programs. Joining us here tonight are three special guests who manage the Glenn Doman programs in the US and Singapore. I will be asking them questions about our topic and taking in some of your questions at the end of the show. So please feel free to drop down some questions while the conversation is going on. So let's start off with our first guest, who is Janet Doman. She is the daughter of Glenn Doman, who was better known as an early childhood expert, and some of you may be familiar with the series of books and materials that was created by him that teach parents the basics of home learning for kids. Janet is the director of the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential in Philadelphia, USA, and she's going to tell us more about it in a while. Thank you, Janet, for joining us here tonight all the way from the US.
It's a great pleasure. We love Singapore. We're so happy to be able to talk to our parents in Singapore.
Awesome, great to hear that. So to start off, maybe can you tell us a bit about the Glenn Doman programs and how kids can benefit from it?
Well, you know, our work spans the entire spectrum of children. We began our work 60 years ago now, and we started with actually the most hurt children, brain injured children, and they are still our primary focus today. But along the way, we learned so much from those children. When those children began to get better and to do things that no one thought they could do, we had to ask ourselves, what's happening with well babies? When we have our hurt babies beginning to read and beginning to do math and beginning to learn all kinds of things and love it and enjoy it. So we had to look to the well babies, and when we started to do this, mothers were very eager to learn, and so we could take all the knowledge that we gained from those hurt kids and begin to make it available to our parents of well kids. And we started this work really back in the early 1960s when my father first wrote How to Teach Your Baby to Read, and that book immediately created quite a sensation for mothers, because mothers, I think, instinctively and intuitively know that their babies are much smarter than they have been led to believe that they are. And even by the time the baby is 8 or 9 months old, mother may begin to be uncomfortable that the baby's getting a little bored with just patty cake and a little bored with not enough intellectual food and intellectual diet. Mom is usually well versed on what to feed the baby and how to care for the baby, but she doesn't have much training in how to provide an enriched intellectual environment, an enriched physical environment, and even social environment for the baby.
Right, thank you for sharing those details with us. It's inspiring to hear how it has changed the life of kids and parents since the early days of the program. So one of the things that parents are eager to do with their babies is to read to them. For me personally, I've started reading to my daughter once she could sit up on her own, around 3 to 4 months, but I guess some of the parents out there are wondering what's the right age to teach babies to read, and what's the best way to do this?
Well, you know, there are some researchers out there now saying that reading to the baby in utero actually has an effect. That's not our work, but there is research that says reading and playing music to the baby in utero is really the place to begin. We begin right at birth by providing the baby with visual stimulation, because at birth the baby is essentially functionally blind. But once we've provided that visual stimulation for the baby, by the time the baby is 5, 6 weeks old, we begin the process of really providing big single words that the baby can see. And so that process can begin in the first few weeks of life. Just as we talk to the baby, we use that auditory pathway right from birth. I'm sure you spoke to your baby in the first few minutes after your baby was born. You said hello, you said I'm your mom, you said I'm going to put on your little pink booties or whatever. We naturally use that auditory pathway, but we're a little bit frightened even to use the visual pathway. We think you have to wait till first grade to use this pathway into the brain, and that turns out to be wrong thinking. This pathway is a very good pathway, the visual pathway into the brain. So we encourage our mothers to begin to use the visual pathway exactly as they use the auditory pathway. So if you're going to say to the baby, oh, here's a little taste of banana, then we're going to show the baby the word banana, but it's got to be big and clear and repeated. And when we do that, the baby learns very rapidly.
So what you're saying is it's best to start even before the baby is born?
There's certainly research that supports that. Our work begins at birth, but there is research to support both music and reading to the baby has an effect that can be measured.
Okay, got it. So then this comes to my next question. When do babies or kids start to understand what is being read to them?
Well, of course, it depends on what we read to them and how we read it. But again, the part of reading to the baby, it's a very good idea to read to him. But we would say also teach the baby to read. So it's not just mother reading to baby, but baby is actively learning to read right from the beginning. And, you know, if you put a little taste of banana in the baby's mouth and you say, here's the word banana, the baby will understand that. If we say it in a loud, clear, repeated voice, if we show the word in a loud, clear, and repeated way, the baby will understand whatever we teach him consistently. If we are consistent, if we say to the baby, how are you? And we come back later and say, how are you? And we come back later and say, how are you? At some point, the baby begins to get the essence of that. And it's very early on. We think it's at 12 months, 18, 24. No, no, no. In the first few weeks of life, the baby is understanding. And by the way, mothers who spend time with the baby, who really are with their baby in those first few weeks all the time, they quickly see that when they say to the baby, are you hungry? The lips move. Or they say to the baby, would you like to do your poem now? Because we have our mothers recite poetry to their babies. The baby's arms and legs start to move very excitedly. So mothers know that babies are decoding language very rapidly. Babies are linguistic geniuses. And by the way, if in your household you speak English and Chinese, the baby will learn 2 languages. If in your household you speak English, Chinese, and Malay, the baby will learn 3 or 4. Whatever number of languages are spoken in your household, the baby will absorb like a sponge.
But will there be a dominant language that they'll be particularly good at?
Well, of course, every household has a mother tongue. And the mother tongue becomes that basic language that everyone uses. But again, we have kids who are in households where the mother tongue for mother is one language, the mother tongue for father is another language, the mother tongue for grandmother is another language, and the baby will speak all 3 very beautifully and read in those languages and understand in those languages. And you know, the great payoff for this is that when that baby is no longer a baby, when he's 20 years old, and he hits a 4th language that he wants to learn, he will be able to learn that 4th language so rapidly and so easily compared to Americans who generally know 1 language and who struggle and struggle in high school to try to learn a little French or a little Spanish, and we do so very, very poorly. So that early exposure to a bilingual or a trilingual household has a profound effect on the baby throughout his whole life.
Right, very interesting there. So thank you, Janet, for sharing your insights on teaching kids to read and about multiple languages. And so next, let's talk to Douglas Doman about how parents can teach their kids to swim. Douglas is the son of Glenn Doman, and he's also the vice president of the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential. Douglas, you wrote the book, How to Teach Your Baby to Swim. Is it true that babies are born with the abilities to swim and they naturally know how to hold their breath underwater?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have been in an aqueous environment in the womb for 9 months. They have been swimming for 9 months. And their brain is very well prepared. The brain knows how it feels to swim in the water, in the womb, so when the baby is born and comes out, the baby is always very comfortable in a nice, warm, aqueous environment. In terms of, yes, we do have to teach them how to hold their breath, but they will learn very, very rapidly. Now, when we put them underwater, we do so very quickly. And in the beginning, we don't even put first we put the water up to here and then over their mouth, and they learn to hold their mouth. And then we will dip them very quickly underwater for just a second, and they will start to learn to hold their breath very rapidly. If we do this with high frequency, in other words, just a second, but we do it many times, maybe 10 times in a swimming session. And of course, the babies love the water.
So is there a best time for parents to start teaching their babies to swim?
Yeah, the best time is right after birth, because the baby already knows how to swim. If we wait until the baby is 2 or 3 years of age, he is going to forget what he learned in the womb. So if we start in the very first days of life, he will not forget. His brain already has that information. So our babies are what we call water babies, because right from the very first days of life, we teach them how to swim, and they love it. Our babies are also floor babies, which means that right from the very first days of life, they have the opportunity to be on the floor, in the prone position, face down, learning how to crawl on their bellies, and then creeping on their hands and knees. And the beauty is the swimming helps improve their mobility on the floor of crawling and creeping, and the crawling and creeping helps to improve their swimming ability.
So what you're saying is there's some sort of connection between like the swimming abilities and how they will take to crawling for the first time?
Well, yes, there's no question about it. And this is, of course, having to do with brain growth and development of the motor areas of the brain. We have seen water babies. There's no question that the swimming improves their respiration, that improves their language, it makes their chest bigger, that helps them to stay healthier. But we've also seen floor babies where the same thing happens. The more they crawl, the depth and the rate of their respiration develops, and that also improves their language, and that also improves their health. But when you put the two together, then you have the best situation of all.
Right. Thank you for sharing with us on all the information. We'd like to ask you a little of our local context here, because here in Singapore, some of the parents they get their babies started on swimming by bringing them to a baby spa. So what this is like a neck float will be placed on the baby, and they'll be dunked into a pool of warm water, and they're supposed to learn to find their way around the swimming area. So do you think this actually helps babies learn how to swim? And if not, how would you recommend parents to start introducing swimming to their little ones?
Well, my wife and I had both been teaching hundreds of parents how to teach their babies to swim by the time that we had our first children. And my wife, recovering from the birth, said, "You're responsible for teaching the children to swim." And so I got in the water right from the very first day of life with our babies, and it was a wonderful bonding experience. I wouldn't pay thousands of dollars to take that experience away. Why I would pay someone to teach my child to swim when it's such a fun thing to do. And of course the book explains how to do it. It has 150 pictures, so any parent with a book can easily teach their child to read, any mother, any father. And you know, often parents make the mistake of putting flotation devices on the baby's neck or on the baby's arms. It's totally unnecessary. The baby just needs to learn how to hold his breath, and then he can go underwater, and the babies love to swim underwater. You've seen, I'm sure, hundreds of pictures of babies underwater. They're smiling, they're holding their breath. They love the freedom of being able to move under the water. So they already know how to swim. The important thing is that they don't lose that. use it and they won't lose it.
Right. But in terms of the temperature of water, does it matter whether you use like hot water or warm water for the first swimming tries?
This is entirely a cultural issue, and it has to do with the family and the baby. So, for example, I mean, in Singapore, you have wonderful, beautiful warm water. You can swim 365 days a year. We are jealous in Philadelphia. We only have a couple of months that we can be outside with our baby swimming. Now, of course, we have parents all over the world, and our Russian parents, they think nothing about dipping their babies into ice cold water.
Wow.
And there are scientific studies that show that there are benefits to that, but we have seen that happen with Russian babies. So the water temperature is what is comfortable for you will be comfortable for your baby.
Okay, got it. Thanks so much for sharing the tips on how parents can teach their babies to swim. So moving on, let's have a short chat with Lawrence Lee. He's the Chief Consultant of Glenn Doman Baby Program in Singapore. Lawrence has over 20 years of experience in helping parents teach their kids at home using the Glenn Doman programs. Hi Lawrence, thanks for joining us here tonight.
Thank you. A pleasure.
So maybe to start off, can you tell us a bit about the Glenn Doman Baby Program in Singapore, and when's the best time for parents to start their baby on this program?
Glenn Doman Singapore has started sharing and promoting the work of the Institute and Glenn Doman since 1991. And obviously the best time for the parent to start the program, basically, like what Janet has said, from birth. Because the moment the baby is born, they are actually learning, they expect to be stimulated, and obviously the golden age of learning is from the age of birth to the age of 6, because after 6 the children go to school.
Right, okay. So moving on, let's expand on the discussion that Janet brought up earlier about teaching kids multiple language. When do you think is the best time to expose kids to a second or even a third language? And do you think this will compromise the quality of the main language used to communicate?
From the experience that I'm working with parents in Singapore, I think in Singapore we are very unique. Our kids are always exposed to multiple languages, not only languages, we have dialect, and in fact, the more languages or dialect that we are been exposed to, our children have been exposed to, it actually helps them in their developments, all right? And at the same time, teaching them to read will be very much easier, because with a visual information of the words of like Mandarin or English, the child will be able to identify the different usage. So obviously, some parents in Singapore, they don't really speak Mandarin, but our school system required them to actually take up Mandarin as a second language. So it's a good idea to actually, beside the main language that most Singaporeans are using in English, show them the visual information of the Mandarin words that will help them to understand that this is a second language that been used in the house, being spoken, and with the visual helps, the child will actually able to take it. But obviously, the parent has to arrange the environment for the child to learn from.
Okay, got it. And speaking of mother tongue, kids in Singapore, there is required of them to take up mother tongue as a subject once they enter primary school. But there are a few cases whereby the parents themselves are not familiar with the mother tongue. Either they're not fluent with it, or any other reasons. So, or they do not speak the language at home, because most of them tend to speak English to their kids. So what can they do to ensure that their kids do not get left behind in mother tongue in school due to a lack of practice and the parents' inability to help them with their school homework?
I guess basically the parent has to be proactive, because every family has have a very unique condition and situation. If the parents are not able to speak Mandarin themselves, arrange for the child to have the environment, either uses friends who of the ability to speak Mandarin, gather together and then expose them. In some case, you can even use some children-friendly video and watch together, and then expect them to sort of develop their intuition to understand the language.
So, from your experience of running the programs in Singapore, how fast do kids go from not being familiar with mother tongue to being somewhat average in the terms of how they speak and write the language?
Obviously, we prefer to start from birth. Usually, it would take roughly about 2 years, because that's based from birth to the age of 2. Most kids were able to develop the language very rapidly. So the key part is to start as early as possible.
Okay, got it. Thanks. So, if parents want to find out more about the Glenn Doman programs in Singapore, how can they do so?
Visit our Facebook. We have a Facebook fan page which is called Glenn Doman Singapore. And in fact, tomorrow we will be actually exhibiting at this motherhood event at Singapore Expo, Hall 6. We'll be there.
Okay, thank you for that. So let's take in some questions from our readers that just came in. Okay, the first one, is it possible that some babies are naturally scared of water or don't like to swim?
Well, that's a very good question, and it really is usually a reflection of the parents. If both parents love to swim, the chances are very good that the baby is going to love to swim as well. If the parents are afraid or one parent is afraid, then that may affect the baby. So let's say mother loves to swim and dad not. Well, in a case like that, better for mother to teach the baby how to swim. Now, we've even had parents who first taught themselves how to swim and actually went into a swimming program, taught themselves how to swim before their baby was born, so they could then comfortably and happily teach their baby in a very enthusiastic way.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add something to that. Sometimes the longer you wait to begin swimming, the more likely a 2-year-old is going to be very likely to be frightened of the water. He should be frightened of the water. It's a dangerous place for him. If you start that child as a baby, by the time he's 2, he's a swimmer. He loves the water. And the other thing is, if you take a baby, a 2-year-old, into a big public swimming pool, it's very noisy. And sometimes the child is not crying because he's afraid of the water. He's crying because the noise is too much. If you take him to an outside pool where there isn't all that echo and there isn't all that reverberation, he's much more relaxed, he's much happier. So sometimes it's an auditory thing, not the water itself. And that
can also apply to the ocean. If you go to a quiet beach where there are little teeny waves that don't make any noise, babies will be much more comfortable. If you go to a beach where there are big crashing waves, that can then scare them from an auditory standpoint.
Right. So what you're saying is leave the swimming to the parent who's more comfortable with swimming and make sure that the environment is not too overwhelming for the baby.
That's right, and start as early as possible.
And if you win with the first child, the second child will see the big brother or sister, and they will want to swim because the big brother and sister is swimming.
Right. Okay, thanks. So the next question, how early can you use flashcards with your child and how effective are they?
Well, again, we don't like the term flashcard because flashcards are what you and I had to use in 4th grade to get through, and we all hated them. Nobody loves flashcards. What we're looking at are discrete single word cards, very big print, only using words that would be familiar to the baby, only using words that would be fun and that the baby really likes. So it's a different world, and we want to think about that different world right from the get-go, because we're not talking about taking the drilling and unpleasantness that we experienced in school and visiting it on an innocent baby at home. It's a totally different process. So you can start showing a baby single reading words in the first few weeks of life. Show them their name, show them mommy, daddy, maybe their names of their brothers and sisters. Walk them around the house and show them this is a wall, show them the word wall, this is a chair, here's the word chair. Just use your common sense to introduce your baby to the world around him. And the baby will be absolutely fascinated with that. So you can start very, very early.
Okay, so if we were to take this approach, how long before the baby could recognize the words that you point out to him or her?
Well, let me rephrase that question. In Singapore, and around the world this is true, but most especially in Singapore, we want a result. We want the baby to show us he knows that word. We should forget about that. That has nothing to do with learning. That's the part where we want feedback. We want the baby to prove that he knows what we're showing him. We should forget about testing and just put our attention on teaching. Teaching is a natural process for mother. Learning is a natural process for the baby. If mother does the teaching, baby will do the learning, and he will absorb the information at his rate, depending on how much frequency mother puts into the program. But if mother gets into, I want feedback, I want him to choose the word, I want him to tell me what this word says, that's testing. And human beings love to learn. You love to learn. I love to learn. But we hate to be tested. So we would say to our tiger mothers in Singapore, and it is really the home of the tiger mother, it's good to be a tiger. It's not bad to be a tiger. But take a page from a real tiger. Real tigers don't test their babies. They love them, they cuddle them, they feed them, they show them how to survive in life. They don't test them. So don't test the baby. Don't worry, oh, is he getting this? Ask yourself, did I show it to him? Did I do it happily? Did I do it at a good time of the day? Am I enjoying this? Is he enjoying this? If he's enjoying the process, you can be sure he's learning. You can be sure he's learning. That's the real question. Are we having a good time together?
Right, so the key is to let baby take things at his or her own pace.
His pace will be very fast, much faster than you think. The book is very clear to introduce new words every day. Every day. Not once a week, not once a month. Every day he gets some new words. Because we adults underestimate the baby. He's learning like a sponge. He's a linguistic genius.
Right. Thank you for your insights. Let's take one last question before we wrap up. To what age generally can kids pick up new languages easily?
Well, you know, that is a very good question because it depends on that use of the first few years of life. If the child is bilingual, his chance of picking up another language multiplies greatly. If he's trilingual, it will be very easy throughout his whole life to pick up a new language. It's the people like me, the unilingual language people. For us, it's very difficult to pick up the second language. So I would say for Singapore kids, because generally they are bilingual and sometimes trilingual, they will have the capacity to pick up a fourth or a fifth language throughout their whole life. That capacity will always be there.
Okay, thanks Janet for sharing us, and thank you Douglas and Lawrence for joining me today on the AsianParent.com Hangout on early learning with the Glenn Doman programs. For those of you who have just tuned in, if you're interested to know more about the Glenn Doman programs, Janet Doman and her team will be coming to Singapore to conduct a course on what to do with your brain-injured child from the 28th of July to the 1st of August. And at the same time, they will also be hosting a seminar on how to multiply your baby's intelligence on the 2nd of August. So if you'd like to know more, please look out for more updates through the Glenn Doman Singapore Facebook page. So feel free to leave us a comment if you've got any questions on early learning or the Glenn Doman programs. And make sure to keep up with our updates by following the Asian Parent on Google Plus and Facebook. Thank you everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
It's a
you.
pleasure.